we're about set up, guys. We are going to go live across the different social medias, and I think we're good. So let's get stuck into this one. Let me just set up. We're good. All right. On the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back to the Better Body Academy podcast. This is the podcast that you come to when you are sick of the dumb diets and unsustainable workout programs. Oh, I've got some energy at the moment. The vibes in our community right now feel great. And to my Aussie brothers and sisters who are slowly inching towards the end of winter, oh my God, it's a good feeling, isn't it? And I'm excited at the moment because Coach Erin, Carly, and Dom are getting on a plane this weekend and coming across to see me. So I'm super freaking excited. Now, what we're going to talk about today is the truth about belly fat. Okay. I've realized in 400 podcast episodes, I haven't yet done a proper deep dive in belly fat. So if this is something that you've been waiting for, hopefully I can help you. And if you've got any other questions, I can answer them at the end. So let's talk about this because this is a real pain point for probably 90% of people listening to this. That stubborn belly fat that's kind of crept up over the last 5 or 10 years, right? And maybe you're a 40-something-year-old dad who looks, I don't know, 7 months pregnant in a t-shirt, or maybe you're a woman in her early 40s potentially, and you're kind of wondering why your jeans suddenly don't fit across the waist anymore, even though you haven't gained weight anywhere else. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into what belly fat actually is. We're going to talk about why it's so freaking stubborn and whether it's actually realistic for you to be able to get rid of it or not. And then lastly, at what point should you chase a six-pack? Like, is that a good thing? A six-pack or a toned tummy? Is that a good goal to even have? So let's do a really deep dive into why belly fat is stubborn. Your belly fat isn't just an accident. It is your body's favorite place to store the extra calories that you have eaten and drunk over time. I want you to think of it like a car, and when you go to the petrol station, you stick the hose in the tank, and when your tank is full, what does it do? Click, 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 and it will refuse you putting in any more fuel. Now, we humans, as we know, we do not have that click, click, click. In fact, we have an endless ability. And when I say endless, I mean genuinely endless ability to store body fat. When your body stores body fat, what it's actually doing is storing fat in these little storage tanks. And the name of these storage tanks, so that you've got a word, is adipocytes or fat cells. Okay, adipocytes. So if you've ever heard of the term adipose tissue, that's because the actual fat cells are called adipocytes. Okay, or fat cells. Now, when you consistently eat more calories than you burn, these fat cells, adipocytes, they fill up and expand like little water balloons, okay? But of course, like water balloons, these water balloons, these fat cells can get full, but the body doesn't stop storing fat. It can still take more and more, unlike your car petrol tank. The body does something really wild. It creates new fat cells. This process is called adipogenesis. Adipogenesis. It's the creation of new fat cells when your current level of fat cells are actually full. So not only do the existing fat cells that you have grow as your calorie surplus continues, your body literally adds more tanks to make room for the overflow. If you were hoping to love this podcast, like, I'm sorry to tell you, that's what happens. And here's the kicker. Once you've created new fat cells, you keep them for life. You keep them for life. You can shrink your fat cells through fat loss, but the fat cells don't disappear. They become like empty storage units waiting to be filled again. And that's part of the reason why weight gain is actually easier after fat loss, and why it's harder to stay lean once you've been overweight, because your fat cells are essentially there, maybe empty, ready to store energy. Now, these fat cells, they work like an emergency fuel tank, but there's something that's very unique about the fat cells of the belly. Okay, the fat cells specifically of the belly. They have a high concentration. Brendo's saying, whoa. They have a high concentration or high density of something called alpha receptors. I don't want to get too deep, but the basic thing that you need to know is these alpha receptors, which are really dense in belly fat, they tell the body to store more fat. So if you're a man, these alpha receptors are most dense in the fat cells of our belly and our love handles. Now, that's probably, obviously we don't know for sure, but that's probably an evolutionary way to protect the organs, right? For women, these alpha receptors that encourage fat storage, where do you think they are? They're on the hips and the waist. And this is mostly for childbirthing reasons. This is the reason why men have the apple shape, because the alpha receptors are in and around the belly. Women have the pear shape, so the alpha receptors around the hips and the waist. And this is partially what makes fat loss from these areas so damn stubborn. Now, interestingly, if any of you have ever lost weight, you'll know that fat can tend to come off your arms and your face and your upper back before it ever comes off your belly. And that's because those areas have less alpha receptors and more of what we call beta receptors. And beta receptors actually encourage your body to burn fat. So this is the reason why, for many of us, if we go through a body transformation, a fat loss transformation, a weight loss transformation, whatever you want to call it, you may notice your face, your chest, or your arms lean out first during the fat loss phase, when your belly or your love handles or maybe your lower back, they barely even bloody budge, even though you're doing all the right things. So what's important to understand is that it's not your fault. It's not you doing anything wrong. It's your body biologically wants to hold on to belly fat, especially under conditions of stress, sleep deprivation, or a pretty average diet. And there's more reasons. Your body is wired for survival, not for aesthetics. And so from an evolutionary perspective, having this big central fuel tank close to the heart and the major organs was actually really important when food was scarce. But of course, in an age of Uber Eats, right, it's not scarce. Belly fat, especially, has more blood vessels, and it's actually very receptive to the actions of hormones like cortisol and testosterone and estrogen. So when your body is stressed, and this is going to come into how we treat belly fat, when your body is stressed, your body shuttles fat to the belly where it knows that it's going to get a bit of extra bang for buck on its demands from those alpha receptors that sit in and around the belly, which means you're going to be able to survive because you're going to be able to store belly fat as a backup fuel source in case anything goes wrong. Does this make sense? Now, as we get older, hormones change and fat storage tends to go from the limbs, right, to obviously accumulating for both sexes around the belly. In men, when testosterone starts to drop, the chances of you storing belly fat are much higher. And then for women, going through peri and then into menopause, fat shifts from the hips and the thighs to the belly. And that's mostly because the brain is no longer prioritizing childbirthing. It's kind of saying, look, those years have passed. So the protective effect of the estrogen pushing the fat to the hips and the waist is lost, and the fat tends to move north. And you will notice this when you see fat accumulating around the chest. Now, a logical question for women might be, does bringing back estrogen through HRT slow belly fat gain? The answer is yes, it can to some degree, especially if you start on it early, but it's kind of beyond the contents of this podcast to go into that any further, and it's not my specialty. So let's talk about the two types of belly fat, okay? Because there's two types of belly fat. Firstly, we've got the subcutaneous fat. This is just the fat that sits just underneath the skin. So for those of you watching on live, the video, you're going to see this is belly fat, and the subcutaneous fat is the fat that sits just underneath your skin on top of the abdominal wall. So I want you to think about, you all have abs, you just can't see them. The abdominal wall is here, and then we've got fat that lies on top of the abdominal wall. It's squishy, it's pinchable. And so when you grab your love handles and you grab your belly fat, that's what you're feeling. It's on top of your abdominal wall. Now, visceral fat, what is visceral fat? This is the deeper fat. It lives underneath the abdominal wall. Does this make sense, guys? Let me know in the comments if this actually makes sense. So everyone's got abs, right? Visceral fat tends to be, it is underneath the abdominal wall. So you can't pinch your visceral fat. It's under the abdominal wall, the muscles that everyone has, right? And so this is why some people don't look fat in the typical way. They've got this kind of firm outer hard belly, right? What that actually is the visceral fat pushing the abdominal wall out. Everyone knows an older fella, particularly, who he says like, I have a really hard gut. This is my abs. And actually, he's not wrong. It is his abs being pushed out by a hell of a lot of visceral fat underneath. And on top of that, likely, swollen organs like a liver that's cirrhotic, kidneys that are inflamed. And the scary part about it is that this type of fat is the most dangerous fat. It's metabolically active, meaning it's inflammatory. It's releasing chemicals that mess with your blood sugar and your heart health and even your mood. So if you've got a distended belly that's hard, right, you might think that that's better than a soft belly, but it's actually the other way around. A soft belly means that you've probably just got lots of superficial fat, which in and of itself isn't that dangerous because it's just sitting on top of the muscle. When it's deep and it's in and around your heart and your lungs and your organs and your liver and your kidneys and your intestines, that's when it becomes a problem. That's when it's worth taking seriously. Does that make sense, guys? Okay, so how much belly fat is too much? Well, a lot of people would say more than I've got, more than I want, right? Less than what I've got now. But how do you know if you are at any higher risk? Okay, for a lot of us, our belly fat numbers, our waist circumference numbers are going to be way over these, right? The at-risk number, according to the stats. Now, the stats, let me tell you about the stats. The stats are when you look at the risk of heart attack, stroke, and diabetes, and you compare it to the centimeters of waist circumference. Now, in a man, over 94 centimeters is where the risk starts to increase, okay? Where the risk starts to increase. Over 80 centimeters for women is where the risk starts to increase. And you might ask, well, why is it that 94 centimeters versus 84 centimeters? That's because men typically store it around there, so it's expected. So there's a level of tolerance there for men, whereas women that are accumulating belly fat are at a higher risk. Okay? So let's talk about why it's actually a problem. If you have a larger waist circumference, this is more likely to lead to what are called the metabolic conditions. Insulin resistance, which effectively means you're having a hard time keeping your blood sugar stable, which oftentimes, most of the time, leads to diabetes. High blood pressure, which is obviously goes hand in hand with things like heart disease. Sleep apnea. This is a big thing that a lot of men particularly suffer from. Sleep apnea is when you effectively go through periods of not breathing at nighttime. Super fucking dangerous and very, very common in people with a high waist circumference. Fatty liver disease and chronic inflammation of the body. This isn't just, it's not just the aesthetic thing. Oh, I've got dad bod, it's all cool. There is a real dangerous part about belly fat, which in this kind of common world of, fat shaming, and then the kind of opposite of that, which is like, fat acceptance. I think the challenge is, what's been lost in this is that it is very, very clear accumulation of body fat is really fucking dangerous. Can you be healthy and have a higher level of body fat? Yes, you can. Definitely. Can you have a six pack and have terrible health? Absolutely you can. But for the most everyone listening to this podcast, it would be an advantage for you if your waist circumference is 160 centimeters. If you can knock that down by 5 or 10 centimeters, your risk comes down tremendously, because many of you are going to be way over 94 centimeters as a man and 80 centimeters as a woman, right? And so it's kind of a little bit scary, like, fuck, mine's 150 centimeters. Yes, but it's also exponential. And when you start to knock centimeters off your waist circumference, actually, the risk starts to come down. And the upside is that visceral fat, which is really dangerous, even losses of like 5% of your body fat, your body weight, leads oftentimes to a massive drop in the accumulation of that visceral fat, the deep fat. So let's talk about what causes the accumulation of belly fat. What causes the accumulation of belly fat specifically? We talked about how it happens with alpha receptors and the drop in hormones. One of the things that causes it is chronic stress, elevated cortisol levels. Now, do you need to go and get your cortisol levels taken? Definitely not. Definitely not. But if you're living in this life where, and I think this is the world generally, we're just constantly stressed with our devices and our demands and finances and getting pulled in 13 different directions, and we never seem to embrace any level of calmness as a society. I totally fucking feel this myself. If in the presence of a surplus of calories, you're having stress hormones, what happens is those stress hormones and the excess of calories get sucked up by those alpha receptors, those fat cells around the belly, and say, ha, I'm going to store you. Now, in addition to that, alcohol. Let's talk about alcohol. I love a beer. But as I've got a little bit older, I've never ever told my clients you shouldn't drink. Never once, and I never will. But as I'm getting older, I'm starting to realize that beer and nightly drinks is, for so many people, uniquely bad. Unlike carbs and fats and protein, what actually happens is your body treats alcohol like a toxin. So when you drink, essentially fat burning goes on pause, and your liver prioritizes getting the alcohol out. And so whilst it's getting the alcohol out, the excess calories that you tend to have get stored as body fat, and particularly belly fat. Now, there's a few extra things that typically cause accumulation of belly fat. Low protein diets, big time. This is partially because low protein diets typically lead to the consumption of more processed foods and more calories overall. A sedentary lifestyle. We're going to talk about walking in a minute, but I have a very, very sedentary job. I sit at this desk for 10 hours at least a day. And if I wasn't deliberate about my gym, my walking, I could literally do 1,000 steps and that's it. And I know so many of you that either sit for a living, or that could be at a desk or in a car. Not only is this leading to your muscles dropping away because you're sitting down, you're not using them, but the lack of activity is really, really bad for your storage of belly fat. So a good question that you might ask is, can you actually target the belly fat? Can you really get after it with some form of activity? Well, the reality is when you do ab-based exercises like sit-ups, you can definitely strengthen the muscles of that area. So for those of you watching on live, not listening to the replay, I mean, this is a muscle, right? If I am using my ab muscles to bring my torso to my hips with a crunch, yes, I can build the wall of the abdomen. But if I have fat that sits on top of that abdomen or underneath that abdominal wall, the fat is not used in the contraction. The fat is just there by default. It's not actually being utilized in the squeezing of that muscle. So essentially what's happening is the fat is just like being bent, right? It's kind of in the way, but it's not doing anything. It's not involved in the process, and therefore it's not being metabolized by you doing all these ab exercises. It does not do a single thing to change your belly fat. It might help you gain strength in your abdominals. It might build muscle, but it will not change the consistency of the fat that's on top of the muscle or underneath the muscle. So there's two analogies that I usually explain to people about how you go about losing belly fat that usually hit. I want you to imagine your belly fat is like the deep end of a pool, yeah? And the water in the pool represents your entire body fat, your body fat percentage, as we call it. In order to get the water to leave the deep end, we have to drain the entire pool. We can't just take the water from the deep end. That's what we call spot reduction, and it's a myth. So just like if we want to get a reduction in overall body fat percentage, the level of the pool coming down, we can eventually make inroads into our belly fat. Does that make sense? The other analogy that I look at it is, I want you to think of a toilet roll, but this time I want the inner, I should have a toilet roll with me, the inner cardboard of the toilet roll. I want you to imagine that that's your belly fat, right? And then the toilet roll paper is the body fat. So as long as you continue to reduce the layers of paper on the toilet roll, you will eventually get to the cardboard cylinder that's on the inside, the toilet roll, aka your belly fat. Does that make sense? So what do you do about it? How can you actually reduce belly fat? It's worth noting that the strategies that I'm about to go through here in like point form, they are going to help you reduce belly fat as part of reducing your overall body fat percentage. And we know that the only way to reduce our overall body fat percentage is to get you into a calorie deficit position for a period of time, which means that more calories are going out than are coming in. So the strategies I'm about to list here are the best and simplest ways that I know for making a calorie deficit adherable to. So number one, and we looked at this yesterday with one of our clients, Pascal, who's lost close to 20 kilograms, and his protein of his diet has been 200 grams a day. Here's the thing. High protein diets fuel you up for longer. They lead to better muscle retention. They lead to fewer cravings, and independent. Even if you have two exact same diets in the calories, the one that has double the amount of protein at the other will lead to less fat. It'll lead to more fat being burned. So even if you equate for the calories two exact calorie diets, but one's higher in carbs, for example, but one's higher in protein, the high protein diet will always lead to more fat being burned. Number two, strength training 3 times a week. There's something about muscles that are contracting and relaxing like this, that not only increases your overall calorie burn, but changes your body composition. I want you to think about it. If you're a 100-kilogram person and you are 20% body fat, that means that you are 20 kilos of body fat of your 100 kilograms, right? So if nothing changed and over the course of a year, you put on 2 kilos of muscle, you would now weigh 102 kilograms, even though you're still 20 kilograms of body fat. You would look better and your risk profile of all of the lifestyle diseases would actually go down. Let's talk about steps, because walking targets visceral fat directly. This is huge. This is huge. If you are listening to this and you take one thing out of this whole podcast this morning, go for a walk. Here's the reason why. Walking, especially outdoors, unlike things like HIIT training and hard cardio, it actually reduces, particularly outdoor walking, reduces your overall stress response, right? Now we know that when we have a less stressful life, those alpha receptors that are telling the body to store belly fat are less engaged because the stress hormones have come down, which makes it easier for you to mobilize fat from your gut. 10 minutes of walking after a meal. This is a hack. 10 minutes of walking after a meal can significantly improve your blood glucose control, which encourages non-fat storage and breakdown of existing belly fat. And there's plenty of studies to show this, that even if scale weight doesn't change, if you just start walking, you will see a drop in your visceral fat. That is the fat that lies underneath the abdominal wall, which is the dangerous fat. Okay, we could keep going in a little bit quicker form. Alcohol, again, I'm not going to say that you need to not drink at all. Again, I love a beer, but I'm really, to be honest, I haven't had a beer in 3 months. I'm saving myself for a time when, you know what, like I want to really enjoy it. If you're constantly, beers, couple a night and building up, you're going to really start to accumulate visceral fat and it becomes very, very dangerous. Not many people know of people who have drunk pretty decent amounts of alcohol and are fit. They just don't go hand in hand. And at a certain point, I think a lot of us, we get on our journey and then we kind of decide at a certain point, you know what, like I'm doing so well. I'm feeling so great. My energy levels are coming back. My body composition is starting to look amazing. I'm starting to fit in the shirts and the dresses and I'm feeling fucking great. Maybe I should just just reduce my alcohol intake a little bit. And that's the way it goes for so many people. Sleep. We need to be getting enough sleep. And this is the big part. It is the major contributor to stress, right? If your sleep is bad quality or bad duration, what's going to happen? You're going to trigger those hyper-receptive receptors of that stomach, of that belly. They're going to want to store fat because the body's going, fuck, I'm not recovered here. This is really hard to get right, but it's the reason why I call sleep is like the umbrella. It's the thing that you need to get first right. However, if you can gradually have the patience and persistence to stick to your calorie deficit, stick to your meal planning, follow a binge day with let's get back on track, let's press reset. The more times you press reset, if you can just be consistent over a long enough period of time, the water level of the pool will come down and it will eventually leave the deep end. You will eventually pull enough paper off the toilet roll that you will get to the inner belly fat that we so badly want to get rid of. I want to finalize this little masterclass by saying, should the goal be a six-pack? So we're kind of going from one switch to the other. Should the goal be a six-pack or toned abs? I think we should kill the fantasy that that's likely to happen. In fact, there are more millionaires in the world than persons with six-packs. But if you open your Instagram feed, it doesn't look like it, does it? You open it up and you see all these shredded people and you're like, what the fuck is wrong with me? And I think that comparison is the thing that actually triggers so many people to want to go and eat and then end up self-sabotaging. Now, if you wanted to see some really defined abs for women under about 20%, you'll start to see some really defined abs. Under about 15% for men, you will start to see some definition coming in. But do you really need to be seeing defined abs in order to feel good? That's often going to mean no alcohol, weighing all your meals, tracking every single thing you eat, saying no to dinners out, living in a calorie deficit for months. And I got to tell you, for the purpose of the fact that I've never done it personally before, until now, I've been living this life since the 29th of June, and it's fucking hard. You're saying no to so many things. And the alcohol for me is easy to say no to, but it's weighing and tracking your meals and saying no to dinners out. And, my son's having his birthday cake and I want to eat the whole cake, but I'm saying no to it. Is that worth it? Now, in addition to that, there are a bunch of influencers that you're seeing on your screens that are either on, performance enhancing drugs, crazy shit like clenbuterol, which is made for horses, and these bloody women and men are eating it. And it's like, fuck, man, it's so dangerous. Yes, I believe that having a toned belly can be a sign of discipline, but it can also be a sign of complete body dysmorphia as well. Abs, and I can say this conclusively, do not equal happiness. Right now, I've got a decent set of abs. If anything, I'm less happy than before about that because I'm fucking moody, because I don't have the abundance of food that I had. I just wanted to test myself. But do I have this goal to stay shredded all year round? No, I don't. So how to think about your belly fat realistically. It's not about being shredded, guys and girls. It's not. It's about being functional. There is health. And if your waist circumference is at 110, 20, 30, 40, I'm going to tell you unconditionally, this is dangerous and it will be advantageous to do something about that. Obviously, you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't care about that. But really, it's more about being functional. Can you run around with your kids? Do your clothes feel better? Do you feel less puffed, more confident and stronger? Are you choosing... Have you thought about this? To you guys in Better Body Academy that have lost 5, 10, 15, 20 kilograms or more, guys like Pascal and Tim and Xanth and Lauren Thomas, and all of you guys are getting great results. You are literally putting years on your life. And I don't just mean 1 or 2 years. Pascal, as an example, you've cut 20 kilograms of fat off. For the record, this is 5 pounds or about 2 kilos. You've cut 10 of these off that are no longer strangling your heart and your lungs. You are adding 20 years of functional life. Shit the bed. That is huge. And not just for you, for your entire family and friend circle. But if you've been fixated on your belly, now you understand why and how hard it is to actually lose. The gimmicks don't work. The apple cider vinegar doesn't work. The crunches don't work. What we need to do is get consistent with our calories, not just cutting them all. Get consistent with our calories, increase our protein, really try to knock our steps up. We've got to do some resistance training a couple of days a week. Probably be beneficial to consume a little bit less alcohol, and then just exercise some patience. Really importantly, one bad day doesn't ruin your previous week's process or progress. A six-pack, it's optional. A strong, confident, leaner version of you that's healthier and safer for yourself and your family, that is achievable. Guys, this has been the Better Body Academy podcast, coming to you with another episode. I really do hope that this deep dive, you got something out of this. If you haven't already, I would love if you could just take 2 minutes to come over to the Apple Podcast Player or Spotify and leave us a review, perhaps some suggestions on what you'd like to hear from next. I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace. All right, guys, we are here. I'm looking at the any questions. Good morning, Steve. What goes first, Jace? What fat goes first, Jace? I've got a fatty liver. So fatty liver is a consequence partially of visceral fat, Goldie. So as your visceral fat comes down, right, what will happen is your overall body fat will come down, but the visceral fat will come down. And what we've seen is that as you start to adopt the behaviors, Steve, that we coach you on here, once you become consistent with that, and don't think of this as like, I need to lose 10 kilos this month. No. Instead, how do I adopt a lifestyle which you don't need fucking abs, Steve? How do I adopt a lifestyle which keeps this up for me over the next 2, 3, 4 years? You've got a beautiful young family, Steve. How do we keep this up? What will eventually happen? Think of Pascal. You're on the call yesterday, Steve-O, right? Pascal, he didn't just lose 20 kilos of superficial fat. He lost 20 kilos. A portion of it is the fat that's on top of the abdominals. A good portion of it is going to be, let's just say it was 10 and 10. Like, that's 20 kilos of fat, 10 kilos of dangerous fat potentially. The only way you can really know which one it is if you do a before and after DEXA scan, Steve. That's probably the best way. Well, not probably, it is the only way to do it, really. You can measure your waist circumference, but doing a DEXA scan is a good idea. The reason that we don't kind of say to you at the start of your journey in Better Body Academy, hey, go and do a DEXA scan, is because they are about $150, $200, but they will definitely show you changes to where your fat is accumulating. And so if that's something you want to do, then absolutely, you can test it and you can see changes in it. Yeah. What else we got, guys? Any questions? So Kez says, makes perfect sense. Hey, Kiara and Kim, I'm so glad to see you in here as well, Kim. Hey, Amy, what's going on, girlfriend? Bella's in the house. Bonnie says, love this. It made me think, does being in a calorie deficit and wanting to be what we see on the internet make food noise worse? Yes, absolutely. That's a great question, Bonnie. So remember, you've always got to remember, Bonds, that your body, like think about, right? Think about life. The highest priority of your body is survival. It's survival. Your brain think of the human species has survived for millennia off the back of our survival instinct. How you want to look, Bonnie, is a distant fucking position 58, right? The body does not care how you want to look. So, to answer your question, when you are in a calorie deficit, you are running out of petrol, right? You are running out of petrol. Not maybe, you are running out of petrol. So you're running out of petrol intentionally so that your body says, well, what do you want to use as the fuel if you've got no petrol? And you say, well, I want to use some of this body fat. And if you're doing some resistance training and eating a high protein diet in a calorie deficit, you will burn mostly body fat. And in doing this, however, you're going to feel hungry. So when you start to go into a calorie deficit, one of the challenges that you've got is a fine line between, think about it, there's a fine line between I'm in a calorie deficit with a tolerable amount of hunger and I'm in a calorie deficit. This calorie deficit is grinding me. I have no energy and I'm just so fucking hungry that it's like I can't think, I got to eat. And then when we eat, we generally overcompensate, right? So Bonnie, whether you go kind of strict, right, or harder into a calorie deficit or in a more sustainable calorie deficit, this is the reason why we reduce your calories down by about 400 to 500 on the meal plan at the start, right? What we're trying to do is reduce the calories down to a tolerable amount, but change what you eat so that you're being filled up by protein and fiber. And when you do that, your hunger will be a little bit more blunted, right? So it won't be as hard to tolerate. But yes, being in a calorie deficit makes food noise way bigger, big time, because your body is trying to get you to eat. It's a very good question, Bonds. Good morning, OJ, and good morning, Adsy. I hope you're well, boys. What else we got? Back to the rain on the Central Coast. Yeah, fair enough. All right, team, if that is it, and we've got no other questions, I'm going to love you guys and leave you. Peace. I hope it's been helpful, and we'll see you in the next episode. Yeah.